September 1946. Walter Reed Army Medical Center, Washington, D.C. Adelaida Garcia stepped through the pristine corridors of America's premier military hospital, her bronze star gleaming against the crisp white of her nursing uniform. At 26, she carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who had seen humanity at its worst and still chose to heal. The invitation to join the medical exchange program had felt like recognition of everything she and her fellow Filipina nurses had endured during the war. She expected to apply the hard-won expertise gained in the jungles of Bataan, to share the life-saving techniques developed under the most desperate circumstances imaginable. Instead, a senior American doctor approached her with a clipboard and a request that would shatter those expectations completely. "Miss Garcia," he said, barely glancing at her service record, "we need you to assist with some housekeeping duties on the ward today." The words hit her like a physical blow. Housekeeping. After everything she had survived, everything she had proven, they wanted her to mop floors. This moment of profound disrespect was not an isolated incident, but part of a larger pattern that would define the experience of dozens of Filipina war nurses who had answered America's call for medical expertise in the post-war Reconstruction period. These women, who had literally written the book on combat medicine under impossible conditions, found themselves relegated to the most basic tasks in American hospitals, their extraordinary qualifications dismissed or ignored entirely. To understand the magnitude of this injustice, we must first examine what these nurses had actually accomplished during the war. In December 1941, when Japanese forces launched their devastating attack on the Philippines, 31 documented Filipina nurses were serving alongside their American counterparts in military hospitals throughout the islands. These were not inexperienced volunteers but highly trained professionals, graduates of respected institutions like St. Luke's Hospital School of Nursing in Manila, women who had completed rigorous medical training equivalent to their American colleagues. The educational background of these nurses was impressive and comprehensive. St. Luke's Hospital School of Nursing, established in 1907, maintained standards comparable to the finest American nursing schools. Students completed 3 years of intensive training that included anatomy, physiology, pharmacology, surgical procedures, and extensive clinical rotations. Many of the Filipina nurses had additional specializations in tropical medicine, obstetrics, and pediatric care. They were fluent in multiple languages, including English, Spanish, and various Filipino dialects, making them invaluable in treating diverse patient populations. When the attack came, these nurses found themselves thrust into the chaos of total war. Assigned to General Hospitals 1 and 2 on the Bataan Peninsula, they faced challenges that would have broken lesser individuals. The hospitals, initially designed to handle perhaps 1,000 patients, were soon overwhelmed with over 5,000 casualties from the desperate fighting in the jungles. Supply lines collapsed almost immediately, forcing the medical staff to improvise with whatever materials they could find. Adelaida Garcia, working at General Hospital 2, near Cabcaban, witnessed firsthand the transformation of modern medicine into something resembling Civil War battlefield surgery. Bamboo became splints. Coconut water served as intravenous fluid when proper saline ran out, and surgical instruments were sterilized over open fires when the electricity failed. The nurses performed amputations, treated massive head wounds, chest trauma, and abdominal injuries that would challenge surgeons in the best-equipped hospitals. They did this while bombs fell around them, while Japanese artillery targeted their positions, and while they themselves survived on half rations that left them constantly hungry and increasingly weak. The conditions were beyond anything described in medical textbooks. The hospitals were essentially open-air wards hidden under jungle canopies to avoid detection by Japanese bombers. The humidity was crushing, the heat unbearable, and the constant threat of air raids meant that surgeries were often performed in underground bunkers or hastily constructed shelters. Malaria, dysentery, and dengue fever spread through both patients and medical staff, adding disease management to their already overwhelming responsibilities. The medical challenges they faced were unprecedented in scope and complexity. Shrapnel wounds required careful extraction techniques developed on the spot. Gas gangrene infections demanded immediate amputation decisions made without proper diagnostic equipment. Tropical diseases like scrub typhus and beriberi presented symptoms unfamiliar to many American doctors, but well known to the Filipina nurses who had trained in these conditions. They became the primary source of knowledge for treating diseases that were decimating both military personnel and civilian populations. By March 1942, the situation had become truly desperate. General Hospital 2 was treating over 500 patients daily, with a staff that had been reduced by disease, exhaustion, and enemy action to a fraction of its original size. The Filipina nurses worked 18-hour shifts, catching brief moments of sleep between surgeries, often falling asleep standing up during brief lulls in the fighting. They learned to perform complex medical procedures by necessity, developing techniques for treating tropical diseases and combat wounds that would later prove invaluable to military medicine. The nurses demonstrated remarkable ingenuity under these impossible circumstances. When surgical sutures ran out, they used sterilized guitar strings and even fishing line. When morphine became unavailable, they developed pain management techniques using local herbs and traditional Filipino remedies, combined with their medical training. They created makeshift operating theaters in abandoned buildings, caves, and even under bridges when the hospitals became too dangerous to operate. Their ability to maintain sterile conditions without proper equipment became legendary among the medical staff who survived to tell their stories. Water purification became a critical skill as clean water sources disappeared. The nurses developed filtration systems using sand, charcoal, and cloth, then boiled water over wood fires to ensure sterility for surgical procedures. They learned to recognize edible plants that could supplement the meager rations and provide essential vitamins to prevent scurvy and other nutritional diseases. These survival skills, combined with their medical knowledge, made them indispensable to the functioning of the field hospitals. Captain Josephine Nesbitt, the American chief nurse who supervised many of these Filipina nurses, documented their extraordinary performance in her official reports. She noted that several Filipina nurses had performed emergency surgeries independently when doctors were unavailable, saving lives that would otherwise have been lost. Their knowledge of tropical diseases proved particularly valuable, as many American medical personnel had never encountered conditions like dengue fever, malaria, or dysentery on such a massive scale. The documentation shows specific instances of their medical expertise. Nurse Remedio's crews successfully treated a case of cerebral malaria using quinine derived from local cinchona bark when pharmaceutical supplies were exhausted. Nurse Carmen Santos performed an emergency appendectomy using improvised instruments, saving a soldier's life when no surgeon was available. These were not isolated incidents, but part of a pattern of exceptional medical care provided under the most challenging conditions imaginable. When Bataan finally fell on April 9, 1942, the nurses faced a new ordeal. The American nurses were evacuated to Corregidor, where they continued their work in the famous Malinta Tunnel, an underground complex that served as both fortress and hospital. The Filipina nurses, however, faced a different fate. Some were evacuated with the Americans, but many remained behind to care for the wounded who could not be moved. The decision about who could be evacuated was agonizing and often arbitrary. Limited transport capacity meant that difficult choices had to be made. Many Filipina nurses volunteered to stay behind, knowing the risks, but unwilling to abandon their patients. Their dedication to their medical oath superseded concerns for personal safety, a decision that would have profound consequences for their survival and future recognition. The fall of Corregidor on May 6, 1942, brought captivity for all the remaining medical personnel. The American nurses were interned at Santo Tomas internment camp in Manila, where conditions were harsh but survivable. The Filipina nurses faced a crueler fate, imprisoned at Bilibid prison, under conditions that were deliberately brutal. Many were subjected to interrogation, torture, and forced labor. Some died in captivity. Others were conditionally released in July 1942, but remained under constant surveillance, their movements restricted, their families threatened. The differential treatment during captivity reflected the racial hierarchies that the Japanese occupying forces imposed, but it also revealed how the Filipina nurses were viewed differently, even by their former allies. While American nurses were treated as prisoners of war with certain protections under international law, Filipina nurses were often classified as civilian detainees or collaborators, receiving harsher treatment and fewer protections. Despite these hardships, many of the Filipina nurses continued to provide medical care to fellow prisoners and civilians throughout the occupation. They treated wounded guerrillas in secret, helped deliver babies in hiding, and maintained their medical skills under the most dangerous circumstances imaginable. Their commitment to healing never wavered, even when discovery meant death. Some established underground medical networks, smuggling medicine and supplies to resistance fighters and civilian populations. They trained local women in basic medical care, ensuring that essential health services continued even under Japanese occupation. The underground medical networks they established were sophisticated and dangerous operations. Nurses would steal medical supplies from Japanese military hospitals, hide medicines in food containers, and establish secret clinics in private homes and abandoned buildings. They developed coded communication systems to coordinate care for resistance fighters and civilians. The risk was enormous. Discovery meant torture and execution, not just for the nurses but for their families and anyone who had helped them. This extraordinary service did not go entirely unnoticed by American military leadership. Major General Norman T. Kirk, the Army Surgeon General, was so impressed by reports of their performance that he specifically recommended them for commendation to General MacArthur. In his official correspondence, Kirk praised their loyalty and efficiency and noted that their service under fire had been exemplary. General Jonathan Wainwright, the defender of Bataan and Corregidor, personally awarded Bronze Stars for meritorious service to many of the Filipina nurses, recognizing their extraordinary contributions to the war effort. The documentation of their service was extensive and detailed. Military records show that the Filipina nurses had treated over 1,200 battle casualties in the first month of fighting alone. They had performed hundreds of surgical procedures, managed countless cases of tropical diseases, and maintained medical standards that impressed even veteran military doctors. Their survival rates for patients were remarkably high, considering the primitive conditions and lack of proper medical supplies. Statistical analysis of their performance reveals the true scope of their contributions. During the siege of Bataan, the mortality rate in hospitals where Filipina nurses worked was consistently lower than in facilities staffed only by American personnel. This was attributed to their familiarity with tropical diseases, their ability to communicate with Filipino patients in their native languages, and their innovative approaches to treatment under resource constraints. When the war ended in 1945, the United States faced a massive challenge in rebuilding not just the Philippines, but its own military medical infrastructure. The Army had expanded enormously during the war, and military hospitals across America were struggling with staffing shortages as wartime personnel returned to civilian life. The solution seemed obvious: invite experienced military nurses from allied nations to help with the transition. The medical exchange program was born from this practical need, and the Filipino war nurses seemed like perfect candidates. The medical exchange program was part of a broader effort to maintain international cooperation in the post-war period. The United States recognized that it would need ongoing partnerships with allied nations to maintain global stability and security. Medical cooperation was seen as a way to strengthen these relationships while addressing practical staffing needs in American military hospitals. The invitation letters were formal and respectful, acknowledging their service records and expressing genuine appreciation for their willingness to continue serving. The nurses who accepted, including Adelaida Garcia, expected to be treated as the experienced medical professionals they were. They had, after all, developed expertise in combat medicine that few American nurses possessed. They had performed surgeries under conditions that would have been unthinkable in peacetime hospitals. They had saved lives when proper equipment was unavailable and had maintained medical standards when everything around them was collapsing. The journey to America was itself a significant undertaking for these women. Many had lost everything during the war and were leaving behind families and communities that were still struggling to rebuild. They traveled by military transport ships, often taking weeks to reach American shores. During the voyage, they shared stories of their wartime experiences, comparing notes on medical techniques they had developed and discussing their hopes for contributing to American medical care. The ocean voyage provided time for reflection and preparation. Many of the nurses used this time to study American medical terminology and procedures, wanting to ensure they could integrate seamlessly into American hospitals. They practiced English medical vocabulary, reviewed American nursing protocols, and discussed how to present their wartime experience in ways that American medical staff would understand and appreciate. The reality they encountered in American hospitals was profoundly different from these expectations. Upon arrival, they were indeed welcomed formally, their service records acknowledged, and their Bronze Stars noted with appropriate ceremony. But when it came to actual work assignments, A different attitude emerged. Many found themselves assigned to basic cleaning duties, asked to mop floors and empty bedpans rather than assist in surgeries or provide direct patient care. Others were relegated to administrative tasks, filing papers and updating records despite their extensive clinical experience. The disconnect between the formal recognition and practical treatment was jarring and demoralizing. During welcome ceremonies, hospital administrators would praise their service and acknowledge their decorations. Photographs would be taken, press releases issued, and speeches made about international cooperation and shared sacrifice. But when the ceremonies ended and actual work began, these same administrators would assign them to menial tasks that required no medical training whatsoever. The reasons for this treatment were complex and reflected the broader social attitudes of 1940s America. Many American medical staff were simply unfamiliar with the quality of medical education available in the Philippines. They assumed that nurses trained in what they considered a colonial setting must be less qualified than their American counterparts. Language barriers played a role as well. Accents that marked the Filipina nurses as foreign led to assumptions about their competence that had no basis in reality. More troubling were the racial prejudices that influenced these decisions. The American medical establishment of the 1940s was overwhelmingly white and male, with strict hierarchies that often excluded or marginalized anyone who did not fit the expected profile. The Filipina nurses, despite their proven abilities and official recognition, were seen as outsiders who needed to prove themselves all over again. Their bronze stars and service records seemed to carry little weight when it came to daily work assignments. The institutional racism was often subtle but pervasive. Filipina nurses found themselves excluded from medical conferences and training sessions that were routinely offered to their American counterparts. They were assigned to the least desirable shifts and given the most basic tasks regardless of their qualifications. When they attempted to share their combat medical experience, they were often dismissed or told that American medical practices were superior to anything they might have learned in the field. The subtle nature of the discrimination made it particularly difficult to address. It wasn't explicit policy, but rather a series of individual decisions that collectively created a pattern of exclusion and underutilization. Supervisors would claim that assignments were based on hospital policy or standard procedures, without acknowledging that these policies systematically disadvantaged the Filipina nurses. The contrast between their wartime responsibilities and peacetime assignments was stark and painful. In the jungles of Bataan, these nurses had made life-or-death decisions daily, had performed complex surgeries with improvised equipment, and had managed medical emergencies that would challenge the most experienced doctors. Now they found themselves being questioned about basic medical knowledge they had mastered under fire, being assigned to tasks that required no medical training whatsoever. Adelaida Garcia later described the psychological impact of this treatment in interviews conducted decades after the war. "We had proven ourselves under the worst possible conditions," she said. "We had saved lives when there was no equipment, no proper medicine, no safety. We had worked while bombs fell around us. And then we came to these beautiful, well-equipped American hospitals, and were told we weren't qualified to do the work we had been doing for years." The professional identity crisis was profound. These women had defined themselves as skilled medical professionals, had taken pride in their ability to provide excellent care under any circumstances. To be reduced to menial tasks felt like an erasure of everything they had accomplished, everything they had suffered to achieve. Some considered returning to the Philippines immediately, feeling that their expertise was neither wanted nor valued in America. The daily humiliations were numerous and demoralizing. Filipina nurses with years of surgical experience were asked to observe basic procedures they had performed countless times under combat conditions. They were required to take remedial courses on topics they had mastered through practical experience. Their suggestions for improving patient care were often ignored or attributed to other staff members. The message was clear. Their experience and expertise were not valued or respected. Some of the most painful incidents involved being corrected on procedures they had developed and refined under combat conditions. When Adelaida Garcia suggested a more efficient method for treating infected wounds based on her experience in the jungle hospital, she was told that American methods were superior, and that she should focus on learning rather than teaching. This dismissal of hard-won expertise was particularly devastating for women who had literally written new chapters in combat medicine. However, the Filipina nurses were not passive victims of this discrimination. They actively sought opportunities to demonstrate their skills and prove their worth. When medical emergencies arose, they stepped forward to help, often revealing levels of competence that surprised their American colleagues. During one documented incident at Walter Reed, Adelaida Garcia assisted in an emergency surgery when the regular staff was overwhelmed, performing with such skill that the attending physician immediately requested her permanent assignment to his surgical team. These breakthrough moments gradually changed attitudes among some American medical staff. Progressive doctors and administrators began to recognize that they had been wasting valuable expertise by relegating these experienced nurses to basic tasks. They started reviewing service records more carefully, conducting proper assessments of clinical skills, and making appropriate assignments based on actual qualifications rather than assumptions. Dr. Robert Harrison, a surgeon at Walter Reed, became one of the first American physicians to fully recognize the capabilities of the Filipina nurses. After working with Adelaida Garcia during several emergency procedures, he wrote in his official report, "These nurses possess surgical skills and emergency medical knowledge that surpasses many of our regular staff. Their experience in combat medicine has given them insights into trauma care that we would be foolish to ignore." The gradual recognition of their abilities led to more appropriate assignments for some of the Filipina nurses. Those who found supportive supervisors were eventually placed in surgical units, emergency departments, and specialized care areas where their combat experience was most valuable. However, this recognition was inconsistent and often depended on individual relationships rather than systematic policy changes. The integration process was slow and uneven, varying significantly from hospital to hospital, and depending largely on the attitudes of individual supervisors. Some Filipina nurses found mentors among American medical staff who advocated for their proper placement and helped them navigate the complex hierarchies of American military medicine. Others continued to face discrimination and underutilization throughout their time in the exchange program. Despite these challenges, the Filipina nurses made significant contributions to American military medicine during their service. Their combat experience proved invaluable in developing new protocols for trauma care, particularly in treating wounds and managing medical emergencies under resource constraints. They introduced techniques for tropical disease management that had been developed during their service in the Philippines, knowledge that would prove useful as American forces deployed to various global locations during the Cold War. The techniques they introduced included innovative wound cleaning methods using available materials, pain management strategies that didn't rely on pharmaceutical supplies, and triage systems that maximized care efficiency under resource constraints. These methods would later be incorporated into military medical training and used in subsequent conflicts where American forces faced similar challenges. Some of the nurses pursued advanced education during their time in America, taking advantage of opportunities that had not been available in the war-torn Philippines. Adelaida Garcia, for example, earned a master's degree in public health from the University of Michigan, combining her practical experience with advanced theoretical knowledge. This additional education helped bridge the gap between their wartime experience and American medical standards, providing them with credentials that were more easily recognized by American institutions. The educational opportunities available to them in America were transformative. Many of the nurses had never had access to advanced medical libraries, research facilities, or specialized training programs. They eagerly embraced these opportunities, often studying far beyond what was required and contributing original research based on their wartime experiences. The cultural exchange worked both ways. While the Filipina nurses learned about American medical practices and hospital administration, they also shared their own knowledge and perspectives with their American colleagues. They brought insights into resourceful medical practices developed during the war, demonstrated techniques for working with limited supplies, and provided valuable perspectives on treating patients from diverse cultural backgrounds. Their influence extended beyond immediate medical care. Several Filipina nurses contributed to research projects on tropical diseases and combat medicine. Their first-hand experience with conditions like malaria, dengue fever, and battlefield trauma provided valuable data for medical researchers. They helped develop new treatment protocols that would be used by American military medical personnel in future conflicts. The research contributions were particularly significant in the field of tropical medicine. American medical researchers had limited experience with diseases common in Southeast Asia and the Pacific. The Filipina nurses provided detailed case studies, treatment outcomes, and innovative approaches that had been developed under combat conditions. This knowledge would prove invaluable as American military presence expanded globally during the Cold War. The experience of these nurses also contributed to broader changes in American military medicine. Their presence challenged assumptions about the capabilities of international medical personnel and helped establish precedents for future medical exchange programs. The lessons learned from both the successes and failures of their integration influenced policies for incorporating foreign medical professionals into American military hospitals. The personal cost of their service, however, remained significant. Many of the Filipina nurses carried psychological scars from their wartime experiences that were never properly addressed. The additional trauma of being undervalued and discriminated against in American hospitals added to their burden. Some struggled with what would now be recognized as post-traumatic stress disorder, dealing with nightmares about patients they could not save, and guilt about surviving when so many others had not. Adelaida Garcia spoke candidly about these struggles in later interviews. "The memories of the soldiers we left behind in Bataan never left us," she said. "We carried their faces with us everywhere. And then to come to America and be treated as if we knew nothing about medicine, as if our experience meant nothing. It was like losing them all over again." The psychological impact of their treatment in American hospitals compounded the trauma they already carried from the war. Many had expected that their service in America would provide a sense of closure and recognition for their wartime sacrifices. Instead, the discrimination and underutilization reopened wounds and created new sources of pain and frustration. Despite these personal costs, the legacy of the Filipina war nurses who served in American hospitals was ultimately positive. They demonstrated that skilled medical professionals could come from anywhere, that experience and competence were not limited by nationality or background. They helped establish the principle that medical expertise should be recognized and utilized regardless of its origin, a principle that would become increasingly important as medicine became more international in scope. Their service also highlighted the importance of proper assessment and integration procedures for international medical personnel. The mistakes made in their initial assignments led to improved protocols for evaluating foreign credentials and ensuring that experienced professionals were utilized appropriately. These lessons would prove valuable in later decades as American hospitals increasingly relied on international medical staff. The story of these remarkable women also serves as a reminder of the broader contributions made by Filipino personnel to the American war effort. While the heroism of the American nurses of Bataan and Corregidor has been widely celebrated, the equally significant contributions of their Filipina colleagues have often been overlooked or minimized. Their service in American hospitals after the war was a continuation of their wartime commitment to healing and helping others, even when that service was not properly appreciated or recognized. Looking back on their experience, many of the surviving Filipina nurses expressed mixed feelings about their time in American hospitals. They were proud of the contributions they had made and grateful for the opportunities to advance their education and professional development. At the same time, they remained frustrated by the discrimination they had faced and the waste of expertise that had resulted from prejudice and misunderstanding. For Adelaida Garcia and her colleagues, the experience of serving in American hospitals was ultimately transformative, though not always in ways they had expected. They returned to the Philippines with enhanced skills and broader perspectives that they used to improve medical care in their home country. Some remained in America, building successful careers and contributing to the development of American military medicine. All carried with them the knowledge that they had proven themselves capable of excellence under any circumstances, regardless of whether that excellence was immediately recognized or appreciated. The irony of their situation was not lost on these remarkable women. They had been questioned about abilities they had proven under the worst possible conditions, had been asked to demonstrate competence they had already shown in life or death situations. Yet they persevered, maintaining their professionalism and commitment to healing even when faced with discrimination and disrespect. Their story stands as a testament to the power of professional dedication and personal resilience in the face of institutional prejudice and cultural misunderstanding. Today, as we look back on this chapter of medical history, the contributions of the Filipina war nurses serve as both inspiration and warning. They inspire us with their dedication, their skill, and their refusal to be diminished by discrimination. They warn us about the dangers of assumptions and prejudice, about the waste that results when we fail to recognize and utilize the talents of all qualified professionals, regardless of their background or origin. If you found this story of courage and resilience as compelling as we did, please consider subscribing to our channel for more untold stories from history. These remarkable accounts of human strength and perseverance deserve to be remembered and shared. Hit the like button if this video opened your eyes to a piece of history you hadn't heard before, and please leave a comment below sharing your thoughts. Did you know about the contributions of Filipina nurses during World War II? What other overlooked stories from history would you like us to explore? Your engagement helps us continue bringing these important historical narratives to light. Subscribe and ring the notification bell so you never miss our latest videos uncovering the forgotten heroes and untold stories that shaped our world. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.